So every week I come up here and I tell you Pastor Pete is gone, and he's gone for a couple more weeks. He will be returning in June. So I'm hoping you're enjoying this series that we're doing on world religions. Are you enjoying it? I have learned so much through this, and I'm so grateful for Wakoh. And normally I tell you all about Wakoh, but this time I want Wakoh to tell you about Wakoh. So Wakoh, come on up. Welcome, Wakoh. One of the things I've had a lot of questions on is, what are the universities? She lost her mic. Got it? Okay. They're asking, what were the universities that you taught at? And Duke was one?
I got my Ph.D.
at Duke.
I taught at Alfred University in rural Western New York, and at Notre Dame of Maryland, which is a Catholic university in Baltimore. I'm also taught at several seminaries here and there. So my name's Wakoh Shannon Hickey, and I grew up in Napa. I went to college at Berkeley. I worked initially as a reporter, and then I became a scholar. I also work as a chaplain. So I moved back to Napa in 2018. I work as a hospice chaplain here in town, and I do a little bit of teaching where I can. And I really like doing this kind of teaching because there's no grades, there's no tests, and people are here because they're interested. So anyway, thank you very much for inviting me. Today, we're going to talk about Hinduism, but let's begin by, would you join me in standing and join me in the Lord's Prayer? So, as Jesus taught his disciples to pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Thank you very much. Before we start talking about Hinduism, I'd like to just make a little comment about Pentecost, which for Christians is next weekend. But the original Pentecost, you may know, is actually a Jewish observance, and it's this year, it's tomorrow, and the day after. It's the Festival of Weeks. And originally, Pentecost was the 50th day after Passover. So between Passover and Shavuot, which is the Festival of Weeks, is a 49-day period called the Omer, and observant Jews actually count each day of that 49-day period until Shavuot, which is the celebration. It's a harvest festival. It's one of the three major pilgrimage festivals in Judaism, and it is also when Jews celebrate the reception of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So Christians later made the Pentecost is observed 50 days after Easter. So I just want you to know that there's that kind of parallel between the traditions. Okay, so now we're going to move on to talking about Hinduism, and I saved the sort of meditative part of our time for this moment. So this, what you see on the screen is called the Gayatri Mantra, and it's a very fundamental prayer. Members of the priestly class in traditional Indian society, this is the first prayer that they learn as children, and they recite it at sunrise, and it's often at the beginning of things. And it's a prayer to the Creator, who is kind of in ancient Indian religion was imagined as the sun. So it says, we meditate on the glory of the sun, or the Creator who has created the universe, who is worthy of worship, who is the embodiment of knowledge and light, who is the remover of all error and ignorance. May you enlighten our minds. And this is a modern rendering of it. So I invite you just to get comfortable in your chair, but sit so that you can breathe easily. And just just absorb the sound. Bring your attention to your breathing. Keep going. Just tune into your breathing. In Indian philosophy, sound isn't just communicative, it's actually generative. And so mantras like this are understood to have creative power. It's not just about communicating something. So that is the Gayatri mantra. You can go to the next slide, and the one, we'll stay there for a moment. So Hinduism, or Hindu, is actually an outsider term. It's a term that Muslims, Persians, and the British used to kind of categorize a huge variety of practices, beliefs, literature throughout India. And later, under British colonial rule, nationalists claimed the term Hindu as kind of national identity and used it to unify people against British rule. Another term that sometimes people use is Sanatana Dharma, which is the eternal law or the eternal truth. So let's go to the next slide. But next slide, yeah, great. So the Indian Supreme Court tried to kind of define Hinduism at a couple of points. And it characterized Hinduism as being based on acceptance and reverence for the Vedas, which is a large body of religious literature, ancient religious literature, that is understood to have been revealed, and a spirit of tolerance. And I put a little asterisk there because currently the ruling party in India, the BJP, is a kind of a Hindu nationalist party, and they have not been particularly characterized by tolerance. But generally, Hindus in general are pretty tolerant of religious diversity. Another characteristic is belief in vast cosmic periods of creation and destruction. So this is a very important difference between the Indian religions and Western religions, right? For Western religions, time is linear. It started with creation, it comes to a kind of an end point in the eschaton, but it's a linear process, right? So in Indian thought, time is cyclical. And the universe comes into being, it exists for a while, it declines, it decays, it's destroyed, and then the whole process starts over again in these vast, vast cycles of millions and billions of years. Belief in reincarnation is another characteristic of Hindu thought. Recognition of multiple paths to salvation and truth, so there isn't one right way. Polytheism, meaning multiple deities are honored. And philosophical flexibility. So there's no kind of fixed dogma or teaching or set of beliefs that you could say characterizes all Hindus. Okay, next slide. Stephen Prothero, who wrote this book that some of you are reading, which is, he's got a chapter on Hinduism in here, and he sort of helpfully describes Hinduism as existing in multiple layers. So the earliest layer of Hinduism begins in the Indus Valley civilization in the northern part of the Indian subcontinent. And we don't actually know a whole lot about this civilization because we haven't figured out the language yet. But there are images, coins, bits of art, that kind of thing that are suggestive of things that appear later in Indian history. So that's kind of the earliest layer. Then the next layer is Vedic religion, and it was practiced by a people called the Aryans, who called themselves the Aryans. And they were a group that settled in the northern part of the country. They seem to have exerted some power over the local Dravidian people who were indigenous to the area. And they were really interested in ritual. And they were kind of a warlike group, it seems. A lot of their literature talks about conquering their enemies in battle and that sort of thing. But they particularly practiced a ritual called the fire ceremony, which I'm going to say more about in a minute. And then the next layer is kind of philosophical Hinduism. And I've got some dates here. And how many of you are familiar with the expression BCE? A few of you, what does it mean?
Before the common era.
Before the common era. And why do we say before the common era instead of before Christ? Because yes, not everybody's Christian. So this is a kind of a neutral way to talk about our common calendar. So philosophical Hinduism begins to develop between the 10th and the 3rd century before the Common Era. And the literature that is emerging at this time is called the Upanishads. They're philosophical texts. And what's happening during this time is a lot of people are, the Upanishads kind of reinterpret the ritual of the fire ceremony, which is an external ritual, as an internal spiritual process. And a lot of people begin to kind of drop out of society and begin to sort of seek spiritual liberation. And the Buddha was one of those people, actually. So he lived during this period, and he was one of those folks who dropped out of society and went off into the forest to practice yoga to see if he could solve the question, the spiritual question that animated him, which was about the cause of suffering. The next layer is devotional Hinduism, and it's based on great Hindu epics, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, a body of literature called the Puranas, which talk about the activities of the gods, stories about the gods. And it is characterized by bhakti, or devotion. And I think that's gonna make a lot of sense to you as we go along. So let's see, let's go to the next slide. In Vedic religion, in this early layer of Vedic religion, they practiced a fire ceremony. They understood their gods as, most of their gods had to do with qualities of light. So Agni is the god of fire, and Agni is itself a god, Agni is a god, but also the messenger of the gods, because it's through the medium of fire that things that are offered to the gods ascend to the heavens. Indra is a god of thunder and lightning. Ushas is the god of dawn. Surya is the sun god referred to in the Gayatri mantra that you heard earlier. And the priests who did the fire ceremony would take a psychoactive substance called soma, and they would ritually construct a fire, and they would offer things into the fire associated with mantras or utterances like the Gayatri mantra that you heard. And they understood that if they did the ritual properly and said the mantras correctly and did everything kind of just so, the gods had to respond. So human ritual activity was understood as necessary to kind of maintaining the order of the universe. So humans and gods were involved in this way, kind of simultaneously, in maintaining the order of the universe. And karma, the term karma, originally it meant ritual action. Later, in conversation with Buddhism, it comes to mean moral action, but the earliest meaning of karma is ritual action. So the priestly class were to do rituals that would then kind of, as I say, keep the order of things going and relations with the gods copacetic. Let's go to the next slide. I'm sorry, excuse me. I don't want to cough in this. All right, so here is an image of a fire sacrifice in modern Atlanta. And I don't know how well you can see it here, but here is, this little thing here is a fire pit. It's built up of bricks, and there's a fire in the center. And here's a priest and another priest and another priest, and they are gathered around here. And each of them has a particular function in the ritual. You'll see the slides when you get them by email later. You'll notice that these priests are each wearing a thread over their left shoulder. And I'll explain in a minute what that's about. But this fire ceremony, these are still performed. This is a Hindu temple in Atlanta. And again, things are offered into the fire up to the gods. Let's go to the next slide. So Vedic society was organized into 4 major social strata or classes. At the top were the Brahmins, the priests. And their job was to do these rituals. And one of the films that I recommended to you in the resource list shows a fire ceremony, and maybe the last time it was actually performed. But that's the function of the priests, and the members of the Brahmin class are also often teachers and that kind of thing. The next category is the warrior class, the ruling class. And the Buddha was born into this class. So was Mahavira, the founder of the Jain tradition. The next class are the Vaishyas. They are merchants, artisans, kind of common folks. And these upper 3 categories, all of those members of those groups were allowed to study the Vedas. And so when they were initiated as children into the study of the Vedas, they went through a ceremony where they got this sacred thread. All right, now anybody can study the Vedas. You can go online and find them yourself. But I'm talking about traditional Indian society, and I'm talking about men, right? This is about men. So the next category are the Shudras, slaves or servants. They were the non-Aryan indigenous people of the Indus Valley. And then outside the system at all are the Dalits, or what Gandhi called the Harijans, the children of God, who were considered to be untouchable because they did occupations that were considered unclean. And you're born into one of these categories, and that's it. You're in that category for your life. You don't change categories. And so, although discrimination against Dalits has been outlawed since the Indian Constitution was established in 1948, discrimination against them persists. Let's go to the next one. I think something that's actually, let's go back, if we can do that. Is that possible? Yeah. I think it's important to say about this that Indian society, in this system, they value order, right? They understand that the universe is orderly and everything kind of has a place. And so your responsibility is to do your duty within whatever category you're born, right? And you do your duty within that category, you do the best you can, and then perhaps ultimately in your next life, you'll have a better rebirth. Of course, the pinnacle of this system was understood to be Brahmin men. Of course, they're the ones who invented it, so that makes sense. All right, let's go on. Back one? Yeah, thank you. So life has various stages, and the 4 stages of life are: first, you start out as a student. You might be, if you're a Brahmin, you might begin studying the Vedas, and you might learn, for example, the Gayatri Mantra and begin to learn how to do the ceremonies that are important to your trade. You might apprentice yourself to someone and learn a craft. When you're old enough to be married and raise your own family, then you enter the householder stage and you work, and support your family. And by the time your children are old enough to start their own families, then you're kind of moving into retirement age and you can begin to sort of think about more philosophical things. And the ultimate goal of life is to, we'll say, to achieve moksha. And I'll say more in a minute about what that means. And so some people drop out of society either after retirement or even earlier in their life, and they devote themselves totally to the spiritual path. So, as I said, the Buddha was such a person. Let's go on. And there are various goals of life that are all reasonable. So one is pleasure. There's nothing wrong with a good meal, a good time, good friends, a nice glass of wine. There's nothing wrong with enjoying your life. There's also nothing wrong with success, artha, success. So those are perfectly reasonable, legitimate goals earlier in your life. At all points, you should be doing your duty. You should be living appropriately as a member of your family and as a member of society. And the ultimate goal, as I said, is spiritual liberation. We'll say more about that in a moment. Let's go on. So we're moving now from the Vedic layer of Hinduism to the kind of philosophical layer. And there are some ideas that are important here. So the first idea is that God is understood as kind of the ultimate ground of being. And it is beyond Brahman, it's called Brahman. And it is beyond anything that we can imagine or conceptualize or describe. But this ultimate reality manifests itself as the material world that we all live in, right? So the universe is actually God just playing and coming into being for the sheer joy of being. And at the same time, the universe is orderly and it's governed by natural laws and by kind of natural principles. And it exists in time, happens in these cycles of birth, death, rebirth, re-death. So as the Upanishads began to be developed, they developed this idea that the cycle of samsara, birth, death, and rebirth, is actually kind of a problem. And it's not that rebirth is so bad, but death is not a lot of fun, right? And so people wanted to kind of get out of the cycle of birth, death, rebirth, re-death. That becomes the goal, the spiritual goal. Another important idea is the idea of the Atman, or the soul, you might say. That's the essence of the person that transmigrates from lifetime to lifetime and is reborn. Buddhism denies that there is any such thing. Buddhism says that it's all process. There isn't any kind of essence or core at the bottom that is like the self or the soul. But Hindu thought says that there's this individual self or soul that is blinded by illusion and desire and ignorance about the nature of reality, driven by karma, and caught and stuck in this cycle of samsara. And so the goal is to achieve spiritual liberation or moksha. And the way to do that, or one way to do that, I'm greatly, greatly oversimplifying a huge amount of philosophical complexity. So please just be aware that I am really oversimplifying things. But one way to achieve moksha is to realize the inseparability, the indivisibility, in fact, the identity of your own individual soul and that of God. Your soul and Brahman are the same, right? And there are various ways to do this. So next slide. There's different paths to God because people have different kinds of spiritual inclinations. And these paths are yogas or disciplines. And there are different kinds of yoga. So jnana yoga is the path of philosophy, knowledge, philosophical inquiry for people who are philosophically inclined. And one exemplar of that was Shankara, who was an 8th century philosopher who developed some of the philosophy that I'm inadequately describing to you. Raja Yoga is for people who are contemplatively inclined, right? So it's the path of meditation. And one exemplar of that was Swami Vivekananda, who came to the United States in 1893 to the World Parliament of Religions and toured the country giving lectures and founded the Vedanta Society in the United States, which still exists. Another path is Karma Yoga, the path of selfless action. Action done as devotion to God without any attachment to the fruits or the rewards of that action. Karma Yoga. And one exemplar of that path is Mahatma Gandhi, who did what he did, not for power or personal success, but for his people and selflessly. And the last path is the path of bhakti, of devotion. And this is the path of cultivating love for God so comprehensively that you see God everywhere. And as I was listening to Jennifer's beautiful singing, and particularly that song, Beautiful One, that I adore, you know, that's the spirit of bhakti, this love for God. Accept that God is everywhere and in everything. And so the path of bhakti is ultimately to see God and encounter God everywhere and in everything. The yogas are not just physical postures. That's what we tend to think of when we think about yoga, right? We think of going to a yoga class and stretching. But actually, the yogas are much more comprehensive than that. So, and the next slide. They were systematized by a philosopher named Patanjali around the 3rd century before the Common Era. Go back. Thank you. And they have kind of 8 elements. So as with Buddhism, the foundation is morality, moral conduct, ethical behavior. Next is physical conditioning, those postures that you are familiar with from yoga class. Breath control, which is an aspect of the physical conditioning. Controlling your senses. Developing meditative concentration. And then eventually developing really deep states of meditation, meditative absorption called samadhi. So all of these elements are aspects of yoga and yogic philosophy. I'm going to say a little bit more about the moral codes. Next slide. So the moral codes are the yamas and the niyamas. So they are personal disciplines and social disciplines. The social disciplines are non-harming, ahimsa, non-violence, non-lying, so truthfulness, non-stealing, restraint, chastity, avoiding dissipating your energy in any kind of frivolous way. You could call it, it's not just chastity, but continence, kind of restraining your energies, and non-greed or generosity. The personal disciplines are purity, physical and mental, contentment, self-discipline, self-study, and surrender or humility, kind of getting over yourself. And I want to say that I think, having studied multiple religions, and all of them are capable of great harm as well as great good. And I think that at their best, religions are fundamentally about getting over yourself, right? And they have various ways of helping us do that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So Bhakti Yoga, which is the most recent layer, is centered on worship of God, and there are kind of major categories. Again, I'm oversimplifying hugely, but there are people who are devoted to the god Vishnu, who is the preserver, and his various avatars. He has 10 of them. Hindus consider Buddha to be one of them, actually. Shaivites, who are devotees of Shiva, and Shaktas, who are devotees of the goddess, or Devi, in her various incarnations. Let's go to the next slide. So the deities that people honor, they can be regional, they can be local. Your family could have a patron deity, or you may have a personal connection to one deity or another. It's not exclusive. So Brahman, the ultimate reality, right, which is beyond conception, manifests itself as all of the deities as well as the material world, right? So it doesn't matter really what form or forms you worship God in. It's all God ultimately. And some of these major deities have a lot of different manifestations. And they may be local, there are local variations as well. So a lot of complexity. And the sources of information about these deities come from the great epics. They come from the Puranas, which are stories about the gods and their deeds. So let's go on. The basic practice of bhakti yoga, devotional yoga, is puja, or worship. And it's like, the best way to think about it perhaps is as if you were inviting God into your home, right? If God, or if Jesus or Jesus showed up at your door and you recognized that it was Jesus, you would probably welcome him in and treat him as an honored guest, right? You'd maybe, you'd offer him a bath if he needed to get the dust of the road off his feet, and you'd probably bring him out the best food and drink you had, and you would probably be very happy to welcome him into your home. So puja is really that kind of practice. It's the practice of welcoming and inviting God into your home. And it's important to understand that the deities that you see in Hindu temples, they're not, they are conceived often by members of Western religions as idols, but you could think of them more as windows. They're a window into God, right? And through that window, you can encounter God. And the aim of puja is actually darshan. It is to see and be seen by God. And so you go to a temple for darshan, to have this experience of seeing and being seen by God. And to be fully seen by God is both kind of a wonderful, but also a sort of a vulnerable experience, perhaps, right? Because we're seen in our completeness, but accepted. So puja is the practice of welcoming the deity in, and these murti is what they're called. Murti are kind of the means by which you do it. And the murti are bathed and given offerings and dressed in fine garments and jewels and that kind of thing, given offered light, offered prayers and music, offered food. And at the end of the ceremony, the food, which has been blessed by its encounter with the deity, is then distributed to people and eaten. It's called prasad. Now, I had a little film for you in which Hindu people are describing this for themselves, but the tech demon got to us this morning, and so the film is not working, but we're going to try. It's about 1.5 minutes, and I've seen it so many times that I could probably do it from memory. See if you can slide along to an image here. Let's get a scroll forward just a little bit. Okay, so what you do is you set up a shrine, and it can be any place in your house, but it should be a clean place. And you prepare a table, and you can see that there are images here, and some of them are photographs and some of them are artistic renderings of deities. And there's flowers and food and other kinds of things offered there. This is an example of a home shrine. Let's go see if we can find it. Yeah, here's another one that's on the top of a filing cabinet, right? So it doesn't have to be fancy. And this person has a variety of different images that are meaningful. Let's go forward a little bit. And this woman, go ahead, you can keep going. So here's a person who has a bowl, I think, of flowers that he's about to offer to the deity. Go ahead. And she is offering fire. Okay, this is arti. She's offering flame. And a flame is waved before the deities. And the flame is also carried around among the people, and they kind of wave as if they're bringing it to themselves. Okay, let's see if we can go forward a little bit. We just saw some, oh yes, here's music. We saw some bananas, we saw some food. She is singing a devotional song, perhaps, to a drum. Bells are played, so it's multi-sensory, right? All of your senses are involved. There's fragrance and sight and sound and taste and touch. It's all very sensory. Okay, let's go forward. Yeah, there was some food there. Okay, we can. That's an offering, and these foods, having been offered to the god, will then be distributed to people as prasad, as blessed food. So thank you very much for indulging me. So let me show you just a few of the deities very quickly. Let me go back to the slides. Go. Here's Ganesh. Ganesh is the elephant-headed god. He is the son of Shiva and Parvati. And the reason that he is always honored first is that he won a race. So all of the deities, they all have some animal that they ride upon, some vehicle that they ride upon. And Ganesh's vehicle is a mouse. And all of the deities were going to have a race to figure out who would be worshipped first. And the race was whoever manages to go around the earth and come back first, fastest, will be the first to be honored. And Ganesh is feeling pretty forlorn because he's got this mouse, right? And there's a bowl and somebody else has got a winged thing, and everybody's off and running. But then he realizes that his mother is the earth. And so he hops on his mouse and he circumambulates his mother and he wins the race. So he's always honored at the first end. He is the remover of obstacles. I didn't know anything about darshan personally, but I went with a colleague to visit a Hindu temple where they were honoring Ganesh on his birthday. And I walked in and I saw this image of Ganesh that was surrounded with, covered with garlands and silks and all of that. And I took one look at it and I literally dropped to my knees in tears because I felt suddenly held in this utterly compassionate gaze. It was overwhelming. But that's darshan, right? And it's experiences like that in places like a Hindu temple that show me that God is bigger than our ideas of God, and God can meet us anywhere. Okay, let's go to the next one. These are Shiva and Parvati. Shiva is he's an ascetic. He likes to meditate in the mountains. He's associated with a trident. Devotees of Shiva usually paint 3 stripes across their forehead as a mark of their devotion. And Parvati is his consort. So all of the deities have kind of male and female aspects. You might be familiar with this image of the dancing Shiva, who is dancing the dance of creation and destruction and trampling the demon of evil underfoot. Next. This is Vishnu. He's the preserver. And I guess this image of Lakshmi and Vishnu are a little hard to see. I tried to bring you a 2-dimensional image and a 3-dimensional image. Lakshmi is a goddess of fortune, and she is honored at the festival of Diwali, which is a lovely festival of lights in India. Next, we have Krishna. And Krishna is an avatar or an incarnation of Vishnu. In this one image where he's all decked out, he's playing a flute. He's covered with garlands and jewels. And if you go to a temple, you'll see the deities being dressed in this kind of way. And in the next image, he's usually depicted as dark blue or black. This is a black Krishna with his consort Radha. Next. Here's Brahma. Brahma is the creator, but he's done his job. So he's actually not a particular focus of worship. He is understood to have kind of brought things into being, and now he's kind of sitting back and watching how things are going. He's holding a copy of the Vedas in his hands. And next, Saraswati is the goddess of learning and music. She's carrying a musical instrument. She's associated with swans. There's a 3-dimensional image, and you can see that little flowers have been offered to her, and she's got a little bit of red powder on her forehead that has been offered as a blessing. Next. These are 2 other images of the goddess, and they are kind of fierce images. Durga is a very fierce warrior goddess who defeated a demon that nobody else could defeat. She's riding a lion. And then there's Kali, who has she has a kind of a terrifying aspect and a kind of a motherly aspect. She's got both. And she's trampling ignorance. That's her job. And if you've ever had or been a fierce mama on behalf of somebody that you loved and wanted to protect, you'll understand the energy of Kali. Next. And these are Rama, who is another avatar of Vishnu, his wife Sita, and Hanuman, the monkey god, and they are the heroes of the Hindu epic, the Ramayana. So just a tiny little bit of, as I say, this much of Hinduism. I think that Stephen Prothero does a pretty good job of covering a fair amount of diversity in a pretty simple way, accessible way, so I encourage you to take a look at that book. And I want to close with another mantra, a devotional chant. And this one it's Om Namo, meaning homage, Om, homage, to the Blessed One, Bhagavate, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vasudevaya is a word for God. So the meaning of this chant is hail to the Blessed One, God. And I just want you to, I'm gonna step off the stage and I just want you to enjoy it. So thank you very much, and go ahead.
Wasn't that beautiful? So calming. So, hope you guys all enjoyed the service today. Thank you, Wakoh, for a beautiful message. It's amazing. I always thought of them as gods, not deities. So it's kind of like, oh, wait, and a window to God is a very interesting way to look at that. So thank you all for coming. I hope you plan on coming back next week and joining us. And we're going to be teaching on the book of Acts and the birth of the church. So come and learn all about that. It'll be an interesting service. I'm sure we're going to share lots of things going on. So plan on being here for that, and go have a great week. Go be Jesus.